So day 2 of Build Better Apps with Angular 2. We are going to pick up where we left off yesterday and kind of extend on those ideas. And the goal for today is to understand how to compose multiple non-trivial features in Angular 2. And so we built a single component. Now we're going to endeavor to see kind of how components kind of fit together. And so kind of at the crux of that, we're going to talk about component system architecture. So we're going to do a quick catch up with the routes that we didn't get to yesterday. So we'll do kind of maybe, we don't have to do the entire module, but enough to get us into day 2, which I think that if anybody did the bonus thing where set up the basic route, you should be pretty good. But we're going to do routes. But then I really want to focus on component system architecture. And if that's the only thing that we walk away with over these next 2 days, I would be pretty happy. Because when you can understand that fundamental shift of how components fit together in Angular 2, it is really, really powerful in terms of what you can do, how you compose your application, and what it brings in terms of maintainability, stability, extensibility, and all the other abilities. So here is the agenda. This is slightly different from what we put out in the brief. As we started to actually put this content together, we just realized that it would be better kind of moving some things around. So for instance, talking about Angular observables in a vacuum is really kind of actually boring. And unless you're talking about it in the context of doing something specific in Angular, it is more of kind of, I think, a theoretical intellectual discussion, at least initially. So, because the actual API for an observable is really, on itself, is really quite simple. It just doesn't really do a lot. It's when you start to actually stack on your reactive extension operators, then things get really interesting. But so we kind of move the observables bit into server communication. And so that is where that went, if you were wondering. But we will get into it in depth tomorrow. But so we'll have routing. We'll talk about component composition, touch on directives, forms, server communication, and time permitting. We'll talk about pipes. So the demo application for today is going to be different than the demo application from yesterday. And we're going to be working on a RESTful master detail web application that communicates to a local REST API using JSON server. And just like yesterday, we're going to be building out a widgets feature. And again, feel free to use the existing code as a reference point, and please explore. So let me show you kind of what this looks like. So by master detail, we have a master list of items, and just to the side of that, then when you select an item, you can see those details, or if no item is selected, then you can save an item. And so my goal for the end of the day is that each and every one of you has created a master detail view where you're displaying a list of widgets. You can then edit a widget, delete a widget, create a widget. And so we're pretty much talking about create, read, update, delete, and communicating with a REST endpoint. I really believe that once somebody can kind of do this once and they understand it, then they can take this pattern and apply it to just about anything. And so the code for this is at this bit.ly link here. And if you go to github.com/OneHungryMind, it is in there as well. So this is just a shorter version to that. And I'll actually just show you what this looks like real quick running in the browser. As the picture says, you can select this here. Yes?
Just a heads up, in the README, you need to install JSON server globally in order to get it to work, and it's not in the README. I found that out the hard way and had gave the heads up to chat.
You know what? I do accept pull requests. So, but in this case,
I'm adding it right now.
Man, you're the best. That's, I think if everybody does a workshop, like pro tip, have a wingman. It's amazing. So we're updating the README to have JSON server. But this is the web application. So you have your list, you can select it, you can save it. It's communicating with the local JSON server. And you can see here that we have this items button. We will be creating a widgets button that basically pulls into that route, and we will be building this back up in the context of your widgets feature. As well, we have put up day 2 examples and plunks. And so if you go back to 100mind.com/FEM-examples, you will see a fresh list of examples that we will be using throughout the workshop today. Also, personally, between Scott and I, our goal is, because we've covered quite a bit of the theory, is to move away from the slides a bit more and actually do more coding. So you can actually start to see a little bit more live coding. We'll probably be in the plunks a bit more. So the slides are going to pull away. They're not going to be nearly as text heavy. And more so, it's just like, let's just see this in the code and kind of go from there. So Scott and I are kind of balancing each other out, if you will. But let's do a quick review before we get into the routing module. So just to review quickly the big picture, we have our atomic building block, which is essentially the component, and the template pair that we're using event binding and property binding to communicate between the two. The metadata is the glue that actually tells Angular, like, this template goes with this component. And from there, I really believe that most of the rest of Angular is fairly, I don't want to say trivial, but it really just plays a supporting role. So you have services, they're just JavaScript classes that perform your business logic. And if you need to modify or augment behavior within the DOM, but you don't necessarily need a template, then you use a directive. And so if I was in an elevator and somebody was like, hey, tell me about Angular 2, this is mentally the image that I would try to convey is, you have a component, a template, they work together to perform a kind of autonomous, like self-contained unit of work in any kind of business logic. Then they leverage a service to do that for them. For instance, any kind of server-side communication, any kind of rules engine or anything like that goes into the service, and then any kind of additional DOM manipulation would go into a directive. And you can kind of get through that in about 15, 20 seconds, and it's not too hard. So we have shifted things around a bit from Angular 1, but in a lot of ways I think it's actually become a little bit more straightforward.